Episode 57 is titled That Day. This episode is about Grisha's rude awakening to the cruelty of humanity that eventually cascades into his entire story of revenge and the Eldia Restorationists. Though as with much of Attack on Titan, I think the meaning of that title can change quite drastically in hindsight. Because this story deals with some, let's call them fairly intense butterfly effects, you could attribute this kind of fateful day to many characters that end up directly contributing to Eren's character. You can go all the way back and attribute it to Ymir, a girl who too was brutally punished for something as simple as letting a few pigs escape their pen. It is that day, that small transgression that started this entire Titan conflict to begin with. A single day of human cruelty spiraled into the 1,000-year-long war we find ourselves in. Alternatively, you could attribute to Eren and that day in Shiganshina. Considering all the timey-wimey causality shenanigans, it is technically Eren who creates both Grisha and Kruger, so it was that day in Shiganshina that set all of them on this path. And also the second episode is literally called That Day, so, I think it fits. But point is, because this war is deliberately portrayed as cyclical and affecting countless generations across countless historical periods, all of them have that day. One day, Grisha was just a kid yearning to see the airship. The next, a traumatized child set on a path of destruction. One day, Eren was just a young boy wanting to see the world beyond the walls. The next, a traumatized kid losing both of his parents. One day, we are following the scouts and trying to decipher the truth of the world. The next, we are thrust into a completely alien society. And on that note, the episode itself opens with an immediate Dutch angle and architecture that is clearly infinitely more developed than anything on Paradis. Much like with Midnight Sun, the episode purposely skips the intro altogether and simply drops us into this completely different part of the world. It is meant to be overwhelming by design, and I'll be the first to admit that this was one of those times where, when I was first watching the series, I did in fact double check whether or not I was watching the right thing, because cars are now a thing, I guess. It is so jarring, but it is so effective. And on that technological angle, remember that just like on Paradis, there was this whole class system between the outer walls and the interior. The Liberio internment zone is also far less sparkly clean than this. So even like a minute into the episode, we already see that Marley and Paradis, yeah, they're not all that different. And what I think brings all of that together is the music, even further accentuated by Grisha beginning his story with the very chilling, "That was the day when, as a mere child, I came face to face with the truth of this world." It's this really cold, almost industrial, I want to say organ? Despite the decades of technological advancements, despite the sparkling clean streets with gorgeous architecture, you can immediately tell that this place has a very dark underbelly. We see Grisha and Faye wandering the streets, but they are constantly being watched. No one does anything just yet, but it's clear that everyone around them hates their presence and that they are not welcome here. And that is of course turned up to 11 as we see them run into the couple of dudes who hit them with a briefcase and start calling them rats and demons/devils, depending on the translation. Also, side notes, just so I don't have to mention it like every single time, in Japanese the word for demon and devil is the same thing. A lot of the time you'll see them called demons, but it just depends on who is doing the subtitling. It is supposed to be devils. Just how casual that insult is, I think perfectly conveys how ingrained in Marley's culture that prejudice is. We've already seen Burrito use this exact kind of language, so this just shows us that that racial divide is just as strong even decades later. These are grown men attacking a couple of kids. I'd say that it is certifiably cringe. But we also get our first mentions of Eldians, in this case obviously in a very derogatory fashion. Keep in mind that at this point, we don't know of any people who are unaffected by this whole Titan stuff. Minus the Ackermans, everyone seems to be the same. This is just here to establish that subjects of Ymir thing we'd get to later in the episode. And perhaps worst of all, we see Grisha mention that they're more than used to this already. Which again just tells us that the whole armband thing, the whole devils thing, everyone watching them, these aren't just a small group of weirdos. This sentiment permeates the entire population. For the entire series thus far, we have been conditioned to root for the Eldians. I mean, they were literally fighting for their existence. But suddenly, there is this deeply ingrained hatred. Kids are being terrorized in the streets. Very quickly we see that there is so much more to the story. As they reach the airship, we see this very explicit visual mirroring of Eren and Grisha. Just like when Eren would reach the sea, we see this fade through white to the expansive blue skies above. The airship, or the sea, was supposed to be a pure goal, one always just barely out of reach. But for both Grisha and Eren, it turns out to be merely the start of something so much worse. Ditto for these shots. In episode 48, Carla talks about how Eren is special for the simple reason of having been born. This episode with Grisha, on the other hand, is about to show us the other side of the coin. The, in Grisha's own words, luxury outside world, where his sister would be treated as subhuman. Her being born didn't make her special, it made her an enemy and a devil to the entire world. So again, just questioning all these titles of paradise and whether or not the outside world is indeed luxury and how much of all of this is just humans being really bad. But almost right away, we see Kruger call out to them, asking whether they're from the Liberio internment zone. Liberio as a location would of course be mildly important, but it being an internment zone further contextualizes this hatred toward Eldians. Internment zones aren't just less developed regions or some kind of class structure. They are more so indicative of some kind of active conflict. That is obviously absurd since, well, there is no active conflict. But even so, the Great Titan War is still being attributed to every single Eldian, including kids who might not even know what the Titans are to begin with. They are not prisoners of war, they are not political prisoners, they are just prisoners because of prejudice, and that's it. The entire labor or punishment system, even being a system, is another good showcase of how messed up their social hierarchy is. I think the music here very much conveys that too. Though with Grisha choosing to just tank the entire punishment to not rope in his parents, and then Kruger talking about how it was wise not to remove the armband, once again raises the question of how much of this is really happening in the present day, if you will. Throughout the episode, Kruger is very much presented as constantly scouting Grisha's behavior, which of course eventually leads to him choosing him as his successor. Not a lot of kids would just stand there, most would run or lie or try to apologize or whatever else, but Grisha just volunteers himself. Even right now, he is already shaping up to be a very good candidate for the Eldia Restorationists. But at the same time, remember that both of them are effectively extensions of Eren, doubly so for Grisha, who would also become the Founding Titan. As we saw in episode 1 with Eren's dream, even without having the Titan yet, Grisha is already tied up in the tangled web that is Eren's story. And with the Kruger scenes we get in the following episode, well, in hindsight, all of these conversations have this super weird undertone where, yeah, both of these dudes are kinda just Eren. To be fair though, we don't actually know the causality of these events. It could just be a coincidence because, Grisha did actually want to see the airship and then that cascades into the story that we see. But still, it does kinda seem like Eren is just talking to another version of Eren. I mean, they are literally on the same exact wavelength. But what I think is my favorite bit here is Kruger telling him to just wait up, saying he came to see the airship, might as well have a look. I think this is yet another example of the world is cruel but so beautiful. Grisha was just brutally punished for some arbitrary crime. But even so, the same man offers him to see the thing that he dreamed of seeing. In the long run, we'd of course see Eren twist that to its most extreme form, but I absolutely love this shot of them just sitting there, two sides of the same coin, just watching the airship. And to play up that cruel but beautiful angle even further, we smash cut to Faye's bloody arm. As Grisha says, they found his sister's body the next morning. Attack on Titan often does these super whiplashy moments to deliberately undermine certain feelings or heighten others. So this, I think, is just another excellent example of direction and audience manipulation, if you will. Being fed to dogs is like the lowest form of life, in the same way that Armin throughout the whole Annie would be fed to the pigs. That smash cut from Kruger allowing Grisha to still see the airship to this, it's just horrifying, it's inhumane. We see Gross make some excuses about how they were busy and that they weren't even there, but then immediately turns to the whole Eldian children shouldn't be wandering the streets to begin with. Literally 2 sentences in, he completely ignores the subject at hand and starts rambling on about whatever fits his own narrative. He completely shifts the blame to them, asking, have they not taught their sons about the sins committed by his ancestors? It's something that, 1, has nothing to do with the disappearance of Faye, and 2, has absolutely nothing to do with Grisha. It's just another example of that inherited sin that Attack on Titan explores a ton. To blame a kid for what his ancestors did 2,000 years ago, it's lunacy, but to them, it's just the natural order of things. We've already touched on basically all of these themes, but we'll continue to see these through both Zeke and Xavier, so more on that later on. Side note though, if you want to see just how dumb our own world is and how Attack on Titan captures that perfectly, pay just a little bit more attention to how people answer questions in the real world. Fair warning though, you may start pulling your hair out really fast because there are a whole lot of grosses out there who will listen to your question, talk about it for 3 seconds, and then just pivot the conversation to whatever their goal is. You'll ask them, why didn't you buy the milk? And they will answer with how 15 years ago a different store, for some reason, had a rude cashier and that is why they didn't buy the milk. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know, you decide. Is the same thing here. We're talking about phase disappearance. Well, okay, but have you taught your son about the sins of your ancestors? What? And note Kruger always giving Grisha the stink eye. On one hand, it's, again, just Kruger knowing that Grisha is like the perfect template for a revolutionary. But on the other, the whole I couldn't prove it, but I knew, is because, well, you did know. You would inherit those memories. Because of the Founding Titan, Grisha does subconsciously know all of this, including everything that Kruger knows. Again, as we've seen with Eren, the Founding Titan transcends time, even if he doesn't have it yet. And another great line here is him saying that he hated his father, but more than that, he hated how foolish he had been. For the 3000th time, that is word for word Eren. He hated his father for burdening him with the key and with the Titan. He cried, saying that I never should have become this. But more than that, he hated himself for ever dreaming of some fantastical world beyond the walls, for ever being naive enough to believe that peace would ever be possible. But with that, we get to the first, not lore drop, not even lore dump, but just all capital letters, lore. 1,820 years ago, Ymir Fritz made a pact with the Devil of all Earth, or Devil of all Things depending on the translation, and obtained the power of the Titans. And let us hit the pause button right there. First off, like we talked about with Freckles Ymir and the sort of false deity that she played there, if you happen to be a Norse mythology enjoyer, you'll know very well that Ymir is a primordial being and the ancestor of giants. Not just that, the world itself was shaped of Ymir's body. His flesh became earth, his blood became the seas, his bones became the mountains, his teeth became the stones, his skull became the sky, and his brains became the clouds. In Attack on Titan's case, Ymir of course forms the paths, but point is, the fake Ymir was just that, a fake. This Ymir, on the other hand, yeah, she's the real deal. Also, we've already seen this book earlier in the season, and of course, during the infamous Season 2 ED. If you buy into the whole Christa as in Christ, as in Christianity way of thinking about it, that is another point to directly mirror the Marley story and the Devil of all Things. Alternatively, there's also the Greek origin of Christa, meaning the Anointed One, which too basically conveys the same thing. Interestingly though, even in Frida's version, the devil is also there. So again, it could either be King Fritz, because, not really a cool dude, or maybe, even for the Eldians, the formation of the Titans was also devilish. It wasn't good, it wasn't cool, even though Ymir is kinda like their god. Then there's the 1800 years thing. Obviously, this is a particularly curious thing to bring up, considering episode 1 is titled To You. I said from you accidentally, it's because I have the Founding Titan, don't at me. 2,000 years later. And that is the only episode where the title just cannot be explained. The series does have a few more, artsy titles, but nothing of that caliber. And then you combine that with episode 2 of the series also being named That Day, and well, things start lining up a ton more. And then you have Eren jolting up from a nightmare, saying he felt like he had a very long dream in both of these episodes, and well, things are starting to seem very much aligned. Though I have seen a few people talk about the whole mismatch of 1,820 and 2,000 years. Personally, I think this is very much a Grisha Keith situation and is just rounding up for brevity's sake. I know some have done the calculation of there being 145 kings, each inheriting the Founding Titan for the max of 13 years, but I really don't think you're supposed to be doing that. I think it's literally just rounding up. The idea here is just that Grisha inherits this conflict, and no matter how much he wished to escape it, eventually he forces Eren to inherit it as well. Whether it's 20 years, or 1800, or 2000, or perhaps even 20,000, the story is the same. As for the Devil of all Things / Earth, from Marley's point of view, most likely I think it's just a dramatized version of King Fritz. Or even more simply, it is an entirely made-up idea just to vilify Ymir and something they do not understand. In the real world, we had witch trials for the dumbest things ever, so I don't think it's a stretch to say that Marley saw a literal titan and, they came up with the Devil of all Things. Imagine living like 2,000 years ago and this little girl comes up to you and suddenly transforms into a titan. I mean, he's gotta be the devil, right? In the bigger story, though, you could easily argue that it is actually Eren. We'd see very similar imagery with him and Zeke, and he would indeed be the one to lure Zeke into his horrible plan, and he also gets the title of Devil's Child. So I think that fits. But on an even more philosophical level, it is just resistance and power as a whole. Not laying down and dying, truly fighting for your own life and never giving an inch, well, for the enemy, that is certainly a devil you cannot slay. More on that with the Ymir episodes. We then hear that our Sol split into 9 titans who built the Eldian Empire, and 9 titans, yeah, about that. We don't know about the 9. We know there's Eren, who should have 2 titans. There's Annie, Ymir, Reiner, Bathwater, now turned Armin, the Big Monkey, and the Cart. One is still missing, that of course being the Warhammer. Though you could definitely already theorize about that, as 1, we've seen that in, again, the infamous Season 2 AD, and in Norse, there are the 9 realms, so that just fits the lore. And if you're paying extra close attention, there is a titan carrying a hammer. So that is the final one right there. Throughout the story, we have never seen any titan use a weapon or really anything outside of Zeke's baseball, but those were like rocks. So yeah, this one definitely stands out. Then there's the line about Eldians viewing other races as inferior, which are, you know, kinda ironic. Then there is the Marley brought down the Eldian Empire from within, gaining control over 7 of the 9 titans. First off, we need a House of the Titan series. But number 2, if you happen to be highly proficient in math, you'll realize that 2 were still possessed by Eldia. One of those, of course, being the founding titan on Paradis, but the other is the attack titan that was lost in the fog of war. And this also means that the one we didn't hear about, the Warhammer, is also possessed by Marley, so we might not know of it, but Marley does have him. Ever since the Rod Rice arc, we technically know that Grisha and now Eren must have 2 titans. So at this point, I think it's just a subtle reminder that Eren is not just the coordinates, but that there's another crucial piece of the puzzle, the attack titan, that we are yet to address. The Eldian king retreated to Paradis and constructed the walls, so yes, it is in fact just a small island. As we've discussed with the size of the walls, the coffee that cannot be found on Paradis, and so on, there is a much bigger world out there. And this is also where the theory about the world of Attack on Titan just being the real world flipped upside down comes from, with Paradis being Madagascar. There are a few more bits of evidence, like the sun setting in the east as opposed to the west, but personally, while I think it's a cool little detail that people have spotted, I don't think the Madagascar thing is actually meant to be taken super seriously. Unless you start going like overanalyzing to the power of 30 and start redrawing like ocean currents and whatnot, the climate of Paradis just doesn't make sense if it is just a purely flipped map. What I think happened is just Isayama doing the good old 2080 rule. I think he just took the real world and said like, you know what, I'll flip it upside down and I'm gonna use it just for consistency and planning. I don't really think it's something that needs to be overanalyzed. I think Isayama basically just thought, this story, it's already as complex as it needs to be. I'm just gonna take the real world, flip it upside down, don't care about the climate, don't care about anything else. This is the world, I'm gonna plan using this map. Think of it like an animator using a CG model to make sure the 2D animation is just consistent in scale. It's like a blueprint and not actually a finished, thorough thing. At the same time though, it's not like it changes anything in the grand scheme of things. If you want to think that Paradis is Madagascar, sure, go ahead. If you don't want to, sure, go ahead. It really doesn't matter. Though as Grisha says that he hated his father, saying he was like a trained dog, we see one of the greatest encapsulations of the entire story. His father says that their ancestors practiced eugenics and ethnic, only for Grisha to fire back with the simplest of lines.
We were just walking outside! Faye and I didn't do anything like that!
Because, yeah, why should she be in any way accountable for anything? Apply that to any other situation and it's absurd. But be it in the Attack on Titan world or in our own world, we are already born judged by millions, if not billions. It's not shying away from these kinds of questions that I think always made Attack on Titan so compelling. Even his father clearly understands some of his pain, but he still just begs him to fall in line. This hatred is not caricatured. We see a broken father just wanting the best for his son. He doesn't want Grisha to be hurt. I mean, we saw what happened when they broke the rules, right? And so, Grisha drops the fire line of who was truly in the wrong, me or the world around me. That single line is one that defines basically the entirety of the Attack on Titan story. The rumbling is indefensible, but so is the world just hating all Eldians. We'd explore more of this question with Zeke's and Xaver's philosophies, because Grisha never asked to be born in this world, he never asked to be an Eldian, he never did a single thing that he is accused of, but he is blamed for all of it. Can you ever say that Grisha is in the wrong for choosing to fight back? Can you ever say that Ymir made a deal with the devil when all she did was just fight to survive? Where Zeke's story is about internalizing that pain, Aaron's and Grisha's is about externalizing it. Zeke considers himself the problem, Aaron the entire world. Just like Grisha says, it was most likely both, and that right there is the brilliance of the Founding Titan. It is a story device that essentially allows us to explore both of these perspectives within a single character. We see the longing for a better world, a longing for true freedom high in the clouds, the desire to stop all conflict by simply erasing the Titans. The last thing we see Eren do is just live peacefully with Mikasa. But we also see the endless hatred of generations. Eren can beg for forgiveness from Ramsey about an event that hasn't even happened yet. He can wish to stop it, but he cannot, because that is the cycle he's in. One of escalating hatred and violence that never stops. More on that in Season 4, but that single line, it just goes unfathomably hard. As Grisha grew older, we see that he was personally reached out to by one of the Eldia Restorationists. Up to you to decide whether it's just him realizing that Grisha is like the perfect revolutionary candidate or Titan shenanigans, but Kruger is of course the one working behind the scenes. A cool detail to note here is that basically all the people here are the Titans we saw back in Season 1. I won't go through them one by one because it's literally just like a list of fun facts, but the ever-famous Santa Titan is like right in the middle, and the always curious-looking one is also right there. This is also your daily reminder to always chew your food. Old Santa Boy could have gotten both the Founding Titan and the Attack Titan. Another straight-fire line here is Grisha saying, "After learning the truth about my sister's fate, I swore to myself that I would show them who the real demons are." And yet again, that is uncomfortably real, because this is how radicalization happens. This is gonna sound like a Joker saying, but they wanted him to be a villain so bad that he gave them one. You push someone out of a community for some action, suddenly they become isolated with nothing to lose. And so, they start doing the thing they were pushed out of the community in the first place, because they have nothing to lose. It is a negative and hateful cycle that only creates further polarization. As for Kruger's title of the Owl, I think it's just the usual symbol of wisdom and intelligence. In Greek mythology, there was Athena and the owl, and in Native American folklore, owls also represent like magic and prophecy. They discover texts that paint Ymir as this god helping people prosper. She apparently built roads and houses and whatnot. And this is where we see the other side of the coin, because we know that she wasn't a god, nor was she a devil. She was a slave. And I think that is what the show is purposely trying to convey here. Yes, learning of the true history and stopping this prejudice is a good cause worth fighting for. But they are being just as blind as Marley. When Grisha is asked how he learned the script so quickly, he says that he barely deciphered it, then just screaming that he believes it to be true and that Ymir is their god. It is just as unfounded and nonsensical. Definitely overanalyzing, but I almost wonder whether the director deliberately framed the sequence as almost lighthearted to manipulate the audience into supporting their cause. It's framed as righteous and correct. Grisha is our point of view character. Everything here makes us want to support him. But again, underneath, there are already signs of the same exact thought process as Marley. When your justice is hinged on a belief, you are on very, very shaky ground. Attack on Titan is, of course, super heavy on perspective, so maybe this is actually intentional, maybe it's not, but in hindsight, yeah, it definitely seems like it is. And we also get an explicit callback to Freckles' Ymir and Ilsa's notebook with the first mention of subjects of Ymir. Though as if things couldn't get spicier, Dina Fritz, a royal, appeared. Obviously having remnants of royalty is a huge deal in terms of legitimacy. Most of the early Season 3 story was about exactly that. But in the Attack on Titan story, royal blood of course has a whole additional meaning, both in terms of the paths and the history angle, as well as that small little thing easy to forget, the rumbling. We also see the not slashed version of the Ymir poster that we already saw in, yup, you guessed it, the Season 2 ED, along with all the other shifters. The plan to capture the Founding Titan and the vow to renounce war is also brought up here as reminders of why this whole thing even started, since, there is a lot to take in. Effectively what it's saying though is just that both Eldia and Marley, as well as Marley and Marley, were just using Paradis as essentially a battleground for getting control of all the Titans. We also see this imagery of supposedly wall Titans interlocking their hands, just like we see with the wall religion back on Paradis. But then, there's the big one. A year later, they were blessed with a son they named Zeke. And just like that, everything changed because Zeke possesses royal blood. In hindsight, things like Zeke controlling the Titans, even in his human form, of course make that deduction quite simple. But as of now, we know that the two puzzle pieces for the entire Founding Titan plan are split between two stepbrothers. Unfortunately for Grisha, both of them kinda sorta hate him, and both of them are diametrically opposed. We also see some very explicit mirroring with baby Eren. Where Zeke peacefully slept, i.e. the euthanasia plan, Eren cried and screamed and fought for like every second he was on screen, aka the rumbling. Okay, but to be fair, we also have scenes of Eren sleeping very peacefully, and we of course also have the Carlos scenes, so, I feel like it's another one of those cases where, look at how similar they were, and they turned out so different because the world is messed up, so, it's not like we only have those parallels, we also have parallels in the opposite direction. I think it's very cool, but yes, we have both of them. Eren also sleeps peacefully, but for my own little narrative here, we're going to focus on the part where he doesn't sleep peacefully, because, overanalyzing. Though now moving much closer to present day, we see how the recruitment for the warriors actually started, originally said to be a mission for natural resources. Technology was quickly outpacing the power of the Titans, much like we actually see on Paradis, so Marley was naturally growing scared. This is elaborated on a whole bunch more in Season 4. Most of their military might was purely because of Titans, and the resource they wanted to pursue is the Iceburst Stone that powers the ODM gear. You sorta take it for granted for the first half of the series because hey, it's just fantasy shenanigans, sure they have ODM gear. But when we start to see very real technology, the Iceburst Stone, well, yeah, it is kinda magic, so obviously Marley wants it. And yes, they also want the Founding Titan. Though here, we get the other side of the King's Vow of Peace, one that is an ultimatum and a threat. At this point in the story, Paradis knows very little of how the whole vow worked, but from Marley's point of view, the message was crystal clear. Mess with the island and you get the rumbling. The true story behind that is that all of this is just a bluff, and the true meaning of the vow was passed on to Tiber and the other royals. That's not entirely relevant now, so we'll return to this point in the future. The main idea here is just that, with everything we've learned in this episode, as well as, of course, all the previous ones, the entire rumbling plan is basically spelled out right in front of us, even down to the person who would make it happen. And of course, how do we illustrate the rumbling? That's right, with a shot from the Season 2 ED. But with them perceiving the rumbling as an actual threat, this is where Marley's plan is born. It's not to actually wage war, but to rather infiltrate the island and recapture the Founding Titan to disable the rumbling. That's why they only target the gates, wait multiple years in between attacks, and so on. Plenty more on that in previous episodes, but essentially it's just them seeing how the walls will react. To them, the threat of the rumbling is very real the moment they hit Paradis. But the whole tragedy and irony in this episode is, of course, Grisha committing the sins of his forefathers after all. Just like when he, just a kid, was unjustly punished for some ancient transgression, Grisha, knowingly, in pursuit of his own ideology, burdens his own son with exactly that. Despite suffering through all of this himself, he repeats the cycle with Zeke. And worse yet, repeats it all over again with Eren. All because of a belief. He desperately wants to escape that cycle, but just like Eren, is doomed to perpetuate it in the most horrifying way that directly leads to his own demise. So again, is that question of whether Grisha was the problem or the entire world. The very explicit mirroring between Zeke and Kid Grisha I think gets the message across. Hate and rebellion doesn't matter if you never actually learn. But do note that little Zeke here is holding onto a monkey, that being his eventual Titan form. And also note that there are a bunch of dead dudes with swords and horses, aka Erwin's charge. But the interesting thing is that despite Grisha continuing the cycle, we see how different they still turn out to be. Grisha tanked the punishment to not get his parents involved, and when they eventually did, he rebelled at every single step. Zeke, on the other hand, he ratted them out. He didn't fight back, and as we later see, and we actually see right here, he adopted Xaver's philosophy. He internalized that inherited guilt and wanted to end that pain. Not by restoring Eldia, but by simply erasing the thing that the world hated in the first place. To him, he is the problem. The world is not wrong. Not a single Eldian would ever face the cruelty he faced in his own lifetime. To him, that would be giving them true peace. Before we see Grisha's next adventures though, we hop on over to the Midcard detailing humanity outside of the walls. I think the line of, their appearance and language may be the same, but they also view humans within the walls as demon spawn, summarizes things quite well. And I suppose while we're still here, one thing I still see people getting confused by is the language angle. Spoken language of Marley and Paradis is exactly the same. That is why we have the scene in Season 2 of Zeke saying that he could have sworn it was the same language. They do speak the same language, and as far as we know, there aren't even any distinct dialects or anything like that. Where they differ is their writing systems. That's why we see Grisha in this episode talk about deciphering it, why in Season 2 we have the whole wine label debate and the canned food and so on. Same exact spoken language, just different scripts. According to Google, Serbian and Croatian is an example of that in the real world. They're essentially the same but written in Cyrillic and Latin respectively. Anyone who knows the language, feel free to chime in with a comment. I have no idea how true that actually is on like a practical level, but it's what the interwebs tells me. Returning to the episode, we cut to Grisha atop a wall in the desert, a sight that is actually already familiar to us as is the same exact spot we saw with Freckles Ymir. The underlying implication of that though, well, it does kinda mean they've been systematically doing this for at least 60 years. Not a great look for the whole Eldians viewed others as inferior, you know? Another interesting detail here is what we see during Grisha's enhanced interrogation. Firstly, it's again just mirroring Paradis to Marley. The scouts also got into this kind of stuff many times. But secondly, note the owl once again watching Grisha. Knowing how Aaron's story shapes out in Season 4 and how his original plan was hiding in plain sight, Kruger's strategy definitely seems to have the same idea behind it. I was gonna make another joke here about how it's actually Aaron's strategy that draws on Kruger's strategy, but that it's actually Kruger's strategy who draws on Aaron's strategy because, you know, like timey-wimey paradox shenanigans. But you know what? I'm not gonna make the joke. But yeah, the owl is a dude hiding in plain sight and guiding an entire plan from the shadows. Sounds a whole lot like Aaron in Season 4, doesn't it? Though this episode just keeps on piling more stuff, because we then see Dina walked out as well. Trying to save her, Grisha screams that she is royalty, but Kruger immediately pushes him to the ground and silences him. Reason for that is the fact that they need royal blood, in whatever form that may be, in order to restore Eldia. Who knows what Marley would do if they were to find out that she has royal blood? I mean, we saw what happened to Faye, right? And number 2, keep in mind that here, it is absolutely Aaron and the causality cannot be broken. The Smiling Titan must exist, and it must kill Aaron's mom for this causality to exist. Kruger is Aaron, and he cannot be Aaron if Grisha doesn't get the Attack Titan, isn't then manipulated by Aaron to get the Founding Titan, which is of course another matter of causality. But point is, the Smiling Titan must absolutely exist. And very fittingly, we smash cut to Aaron, who jolts awake, screaming at the top of his lungs as tears roll down his face. And this right here is the Founding Titan memory soup. The first questions he asks is, where am I? I'm not him. He looks to his left, the place where he just saw Dina turned. At this point in time, he thinks he is Grisha atop that wall. Hold that thought for just a minute. An interesting thing to note here is the prison imagery. The whole imprisonment is really just a slap on the wrist for them going against Levi. It's really not like actual imprisonment as we saw back in Season 1 or as we'd see later in Season 4. My read on it was always that in Season 1, Aaron is unsure of himself, he questions his own sanity, and he feels truly trapped. In Season 4, on the other hand, he makes it painfully clear that he could free himself at any moment. He simply chooses to remain there for them. This scene to me more so evokes that sense of confinement with the Curse of Ymir, which is also why I think we see only Aaron's trio for this entire lore dump. Capturing the Colossal might have been a great triumph, and the Titan Shifters are still the hope for humanity. But suddenly, Mikasa is alone, locked away from her two closest by a brick wall. The brick wall being the Curse of Ymir. More on that next time though. Bedhead Mikasa jumping up to ask about Aaron is like very cute though. But Armin immediately asks about the whole, I'm not him, while Mikasa asks whether he is crying. And then, the bombshell. I feel like I just had a really long dream. That is of course word for word the first episode, including Mikasa asking about the crying parts. So yes, all of this is just Aaron's loop being brought back into the forefront. The Smiling Titan is just the common motif to tie all of these events together, including the very end. Even before getting his Titans, he saw the death of his mother in his long dream. He saw Dina being turned into a Titan. He saw the cruelty of humanity. And so he mumbles that it wasn't a dream. They were memories. His dad's memories. As we fade back to the wall, and he says, that Titan, it was you. That Titan here being Aaron's point of view, because he of course recognizes the smiling Titan, while it was you is recognizing Dina through Grisha. It's this mind-bending mixture of hatred for the smiling Titan, but also love and empathy. She too, in his own words, was a fellow patriot fighting to restore their freedom, but she is also the monster that broke Aaron, broke his dreams, and broke everything. Though what I think really tends to be overlooked here are all the Gross scenes. First off, as he talks about his whole "we'll make them dance" thing, he says they'll turn one of them into a 3-meter. It is a tiny throwaway line, but it implies something that we never explore any further. Control over how pure Titans actually turn out. It's not entirely relevant here, so we won't waste too much time on that now, but I talk about it a bit more in the context of the Radvaz Titan arc. The line is in the manga too, so it's just one of those things that implies more Titan signs that we just don't really get to see. Definitely interesting to think about though. Though secondly, this is another one of those times where I think the dub VA and specific wording outshines the sub. Those dead eyes as he just turns to Grisha saying,
I just find it interesting.
For me, is even more chilling than saying that he finds it fun. There are a ton of messed up villains in fiction who find violence and suffering quote-unquote fun. But interesting, well, that is a whole different meaning. One with potentially far darker implications akin to what we see with Ymir's inheritance. It's this cold detachment. He doesn't just enjoy their pain, he intellectualizes it. For him, it is just a natural thing that happens, and so he takes part in it. It's so much more unsettling to me. Though what I think is the best part here is what he says next. Obviously, all of us can agree that Gross is very gross. Yes, I've been saving that one up for a little while now. But his philosophy, much like all the other quote-unquote bad characters we see in the series, does have some very uncomfortable truths underneath. He talks about how most people actually value cruelty, then saying that peace is great and all, but it leaves something missing in our lives. And you know what the worst part is? What he's saying is not wrong. Be it monkeys fighting over status, warlords waging wars, the Colosseum and fighting for sports, public executions, modern fighting entertainments, all of it, it's violence. Violence we actively seek out. It's more controlled and quote-unquote humane violence, of course it is, but it is still violence. Most of popular television, most compelling fiction in general, is all about conflict and about violence. Most people, when shown a story with no conflict, will tell you that it's a boring story. It's a very uncomfortable truth that no one really likes to admit, but given the opportunity to exercise control and power over people, a large part of the population would not just do that, but revel in it. The Stanford Prison Experiment, the Milgram Experiment, the Ash Conformity Experiment, and probably a dozen others all reveal just how malleable people are. And that is also the message of Attack on Titan. Be it basic spears or swords or modern weaponry, nothing about people has ever changed. We are still just dumb little monkeys that somehow got nukes. To put a spin on Mikas's words yet again, humanity is a beautiful thing and has achieved so much. But at every opportunity, for some reason, it is also endlessly cruel. Gross's philosophy is essentially Aaron and Grisha, but without any hope whatsoever. It is just entirely nihilistic. He tells himself that he faced it head-on for so long that he truly understood it. It's this deeply disturbing, almost circular argument that really does make you stop and reconsider what this story is even about. Because the next thing he asks is, restoring Eldia, how do you plan on doing that? By destroying Marley. From his point of view, every single peaceful society is built on a foundation of violence. And the only way to thrive in this world is to actively engage it rather than simply stand by. The irony, of course, being that that is exactly what Ymir did. But because Kruger is unfathomably based, he just says Mr. Gross, more like Mr. Gross, and pushes him off the wall, accompanied by some of the greatest music direction in the entire series. The music constantly ebbs and flows to accentuate every single moment. It genuinely feels like the symphonic suite was essentially created for this scene and then just made into two separate pieces. What is there even to say about the reveal? The whole speech of, "Is it fun to watch? I'm the owl, Grisha," it just sends shivers down my spine every single time I watch it. There is, of course, the mildly amusing fact of this being yet another wall reveal, only this time, like, on the complete opposite side, with Kruger actually turning out to be an ally. Actually, you know what? Let's ask Reiner what he thinks about this.
I'm sick and tired of all these walls.
Okay, bro, sorry. Pro got real salty real fast. I love it, though. It's great. And also, the scene of Kruger just tossing the hat is, one, really cool, but I think it can also be seen as sort of rejecting that position, rejecting his uniform, and rejecting everything he stood for. Much like with Zeke's throwing earlier in the season, there's also a whole bunch of cleverly reused animation here, but yeah, it is still absolutely breathtaking. And then the green eye fading in, it's all coming together real fast. The last Titan that Marley lost, the one that enabled Grisha's attack on the Crystal Catacombs, the Attack Titan. There is a lot more to say about Kruger's transformation using the knife as opposed to the hand-biting technique, the Curse of Ymir, and all of that, but we'll leave all that for next time. As far as this episode goes, I think it's fair to say that the Kruger reveal is like condensing the entire first half of Season 2 in like 15 minutes, and then having the wall reveal just at the end. We've gone from barely stepping foot in Marley to Ymir lore going as far back as the first mentions of the Wall religion, and by the way, also confirming that the Season 2 AD, that's not just being artistic, that is an actual thing in the story. You can go back and look at the other things in that ED now. We get Zeke and Dina's royal blood, and we get the rumbling, and now the final missing Titan power who would completely transcend the story as we know it. If you enjoy theorizing, this is one of those episodes where it kind of gives you all the answers, but in giving you the answers, it just creates like 3 more mysteries at every single answer. But with all that said, unknowingly, this is the day where they started the War for Paradis. And on that note, that is episode 57. As you might be able to tell by the video length, these episodes are not exactly getting easier to make, and I think Season 4 is going to be like a whole different can of worms. But yeah, hopefully this one is on time. This one was an absolutely massive one that took me like the power of the 9 to make sure that I get up. But here we are, another huge one full of very big reveals. And another big reveal. You might notice I have a t-shirt of my own little mug. Yes, I have merch now. Right now it is very low-key. I literally got this batch for myself because, well, I just kind of wanted clothes for myself, I'm not gonna lie. But if you want one, there is a link in the description, the very top one probably. It might not be there by the time you go there, but it's going to be there. I have a few other designs to do with like a little, you know, a few inside jokes we have on the channel here. For example, the Crystal Catacombs and the CNTs. But we'll see what happens there. It's basically like an alternate Patreon if you want to, you know, support me and get something in return. That's probably the best way of doing that. But alright, that is enough yapping, because next time we are right back to even more insane Marley stuff and actually getting to know this thing called the Attack Titan. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. Way too much yapping already. All the links are in the description. Send me your memes on the subreddit. And with that, let us say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Iron Sky. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.